My guest on this episode, Andrew McCarthy, is a film actor, television director, New York Times bestselling author, and acclaimed travel writer. He was in films back in the 80s like St. Elmo's Fire, Pretty in Pink, Less Than Zero. He went on to make some really quirky movies like Mannequin and Weekend at Bernie's, and he became part of a young group of very famous movie actors that were known as the Brat Pack. And he then went on to write his New York Times best-selling memoir, Brat, an 80s Story, a couple of years back, which really goes into detail about his childhood, his family dynamics, his sudden and extreme rise to fame in the 80s in a way. And what's interesting is his new book, Walking with Sam, is about revisiting the Camino de Santiago trail in Spain with his son Sam. And I think you're going to find some really interesting and cool surprises, not just in my questions, but in Andrew McCarthy's answers. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this beautiful and interesting interview with Andrew McCarthy. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to ask you is, in the prologue of your book, Walking with Sam, you talk about your first time walking it's called the Camino de Santiago trail in Spain, correct?
Camino de Santiago, yeah.
Yes, okay. So the first time you took that walk, which is clear across the country of Spain, you did it as kind of like a spiritual rebalancing. And you said that it was kind of like the extreme and sudden fame that happened in your 20s. It almost seemed like you needed something that was going to rebalance your spirit. But you said something to the effect of, you didn't feel that you earned your accomplishments at the time. Why didn't you earn your accomplishments?
Good question. Oh, I didn't know it was a spiritual rebalancing. I'd never phrased it like that, but I think that's actually what happened. And I wasn't aware that I knew I needed something, I guess. And I wasn't sure what it was. I wasn't sure quite how I ended up at the Camino. But I guess I was young and I became very successful very quickly. And I felt in a certain way that I suppose now it's called an imposter syndrome or something. Which
now there's a buzzword for everything. Yeah,
exactly. So I guess I just felt unprepared, certainly also. And so I guess I just felt like unseen in a certain way. I was seen in a certain way, and I wasn't sure that's who I was. And when you're young, particularly, you're not sure who you are yet. And so to be sort of seen and pegged in a certain way, I was like, wait, this isn't quite accurate of who I am.
Okay.
Once the Brat Pack term came about and stuff, that it was I was sort of lumped in with a group of people that initially we didn't like. I didn't want to be labeled and stigmatized and pigeonholed, particularly when you're young and when you're an actor. You don't want to be sort of grouped to anything. You want to be an individual. So anyway, initially it was a shocking thing. Mm-hmm. Over the decades since, it's become this, iconically affectionate term, the Brat Pack, for a moment in, pop culture in the 80s, and I become this sort of avatar for people's youth of a certain generation. But when I was young, I became successful. Yeah, I think I just sort of felt like, well, what just happened? And I don't even have my feet under me yet. And this stuff's happening. So
decades later, you come full circle and you take your eldest son, Sam, to do the same walk with you that you originally did when you were a young man. How old were you when you took this walk across Spain the first time?
I was not so young. I was, I think in my very early 30s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I sort of survived that early thing of fame and was not sure what I was looking for, really. And I came across a book in a bookstore about the Camino de Santiago, which I'd never heard of. It's an ancient pilgrimage route across the north of Spain for 500 miles. And I don't know, there was something in that just spoke to me. And I read the book, and then like a week later, I said, I'm going to Spain. And I went to Spain to do that. And I wasn't sure why. But I did find it a life-changing experience. I think in one way, I mentioned in this book here, there was a moment about halfway into the walk when I was in a field of wheat and I just sort of had this sobbing tantrum. I had a revelation of like how much fear had been so dominant in my life in a way that I'd never realized before. And it was quite a liberating moment. And that sort of changed my place in the world.
Interesting. Yeah. So now you take your son. How old was he at the time?
He was 19, when we went. He only went a year and a half ago. He was 19.
What I'm sure you regaled him with stories of when you did this for the first time when he was growing up, right?
Well, I tried not to regale because nothing more boring than, as my daughter calls them, oh, here comes a dad story. So I tried not to regale too much about it, but I did. They had known for their whole lives. Occasionally, I'd mentioned the Camino and how sort of big experience it was. And everyone I know that I've encouraged many people over the years to go do it, and everyone who has done it has also had a big life-changing experience at it. So I'd recommend it to anyone in a moment of sort of transition in their life. But, my relationship with my father ended basically when I was 17 years old and left the house. And it just sort of, that was the end of our relationship. And I didn't want that to happen with my kids. And so I wanted to figure out a way to transition our relationship to one of two adults, as it were, as opposed to, the dominant parent talking to the kid, but to sort of be equals in the world, And so I thought this trip might be a way to sort of begin that transition to happening. And it was a big experience for the both of us.
I could see a transformation in him from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. But do you feel like he got something profound out of the experience?
Yeah. I mean, on day 2, he said, "Dad, what's the point of this effing walk?" And he didn't say effing, and on the last day, he said, "Dad, this is the only 10 out of 10 thing I've ever done in my life." So yeah, I mean, he had a big experience, and I knew he would, because it's hard not to. It's impossible not to. That kind of sheer attrition of walking day after day, all day. There's something profound in walking that happens. But I just knew I had to keep him on the road, so he didn't quit. Like, keep him from quitting at the beginning, I knew something would happen, and I had the luxury that you very rarely get with adult children, which was the luxury of time. Usually our kids are running out the door and I'm like, "Hey, wait a minute, I'll see you later," and knew that if I just sort of walked beside him, everything was on the table, for that.
Everything just starts to come out. Yeah.
You sit my son down for a chat and you're not going to get very far, but you get it all comes out. Yeah.
There was something funny that it was at the beginning of the book where you said, every young American really gets something profound when they visit Europe for the first time. I really hope that Sam has that same profound epiphany. And he then turns to you and says, "What? How come there are no Flamin' Hot Cheetos in Europe, Dad? What's the deal with that?"
Yeah, these are the big questions that we need answered, But that just teaches, that was just a sort of an example of expectations are going to lead to disappointment every time. You got to let people have their own experiences. We can lead them and try and have them force an experience of them. And they just, people A, can feel that and they're going to resist it. And B, they're going to have their own experience of things. And, we have no idea what their experience is going to be,
Right. Do you feel like early fame for you was kind of a trauma, like almost like a trauma that you had to overcome and heal from? Or is that just what I got from reading about you and reading your memoir and then, kind of having the memoir bleed into this book?
Well, trauma is a bit of a big word. There are people that do experience real trauma, and being famous in the movies in your early 20s I don't think quite qualifies trauma. It was life-altering, certainly, and wondrous in many ways, overwhelming, certainly. But I don't think it was traumatic. I did think it took me a long time to sort of recover from it and to sort of come down and sift through all of it to sort of find who I was, because when you're in your early 20s, you're still trying to figure out your place in the world and who you are. And I think that sort of rocked that boat for a while. And early fame certainly altered who I would become. So, but was it traumatic? I think that's a bit, I try not to use words like that from that kind of thing, because it was, a blessing, really.
Okay. Yeah. You made another comment. You said that your fame blew up your dynamic with your siblings, and it was never the same from that point on. How does fame blow up family dynamics exactly?
It depends on the family, certainly. Some people can bring closer together, and you go to your family for security and counsel and things like that. And is it a place of solace? That was not, that was not my experience. My dad was having a hard time in his life the moment I was getting famous. So my fortunes were rising, his were falling, and that was difficult for him. And with my brothers growing up, I was never like the star of the family. My older brother was a star baseball player. The other one was, the smart one. And I was just a little sensitive kid. So suddenly I'm in movies, and they're in their early mid-20s. So they're still, like we were just talking about, trying to figure out their place in the world. And suddenly their little brother goes and is now suddenly American royalty, because that's what movie stars are in America's royalty, So I'm now this thing. And I don't know that it ever really recovered from that.
Yeah, I think that it's so hard as human beings in general not to experience emotions like jealousy, envy, or the disease of comparison. If my brother is this, does that mean that I'm less? Or can't we just be different and just be on different paths?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak exactly to their experience and their feelings, but it certainly altered the way, largely because their friends would suddenly go, instead of, oh, that's your little brother, Andy, it's like, your brother's Andrew McCarthy from St. Elmo's Fire? Oh my God. And it's suddenly shocking in that way. And so it's by third person, their experience of me is altered, and if you know what I mean. So my particular family wasn't the kind where, you talk about that stuff and you come back and kind of, whoa, that must be crazy. What's that feel like? That's crazy.
Yeah.
That just didn't particularly happen.
It didn't happen. Okay.
And also, I was such that I can't blame them for it. I'm very much a loner in many ways. So, and when that stuff started to happen, instead of going and seeking kind of support and solace, I further isolated and separated myself because I just sort of hunkered down within myself to a degree. So I'm certainly, if there's blame to be had, I'm sure it's mine.
Got it. And so now Sam is an actor. He's a working actor. He was on the show Dead to Me with Christina Applegate. And your daughter has appeared on Broadway. So yeah. Everything that from everything that I read, it seemed like you were never quite 100% comfortable in your own skin, like on red carpets, in front of the camera, all of that. So did you want to keep your kids away from show business? Did you feel like, well, if this is what they want to do, I'm gonna support them and encourage them? Or how did that come about?
Hopefully I was in many ways more at home in front of the camera than anywhere else in certain ways. But I found all the attention in the red carpet of it all very kind of nerve-wracking. And but I always used to joke that I didn't want my kids to be actors and that God is cruel and gives us these things. But in reality, acting saved my life when I was 15. I didn't know I had been cut from the high school basketball team, and my mother suggested I try out for the play. And I said, I don't want to try out for the play. I want to be the point guard. But but I did, and I was the Artful Dodger in Oliver, and and that changed my life. I walked out on stage, and suddenly I knew what I was going to be, and I knew it was a profound experience because I told nobody. It was mine, and I didn't want it to be someone to squash that before it had taken root inside me deep enough. So acting, kind of saved my life when I was 15 in a very real way. I think when we're teenagers, we have to find something, and often it's sports or music. For me, it was acting, and if we don't, we often drift and get ourselves into trouble with, drugs or alcohol or just sort of a drifting despair when we're young. So it's important to find something as a teenager. And I found acting, and it saved me. And so who am I to say if my kids wanted to do that they shouldn't? That what they get from seeing me do it is they know it's not a glamorous kind of thing. It's not premieres and red carpets. It's you go to work and you figure out how to do it, and then you get up early and you go, and it's a great job, but it's a job like other jobs. And so it's not perceived as particularly glamorous in my house, but it's a wonderful life and career. But it's sort of like the family business in a certain way. So why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? And I felt like myself when I acted, and still do. After having been away from acting for a long time, I recently went back to it, and I felt like myself again when I did it. And if they feel that for them, fantastic.
Yeah, anything that you do where you feel like you're in flow is the right thing to do, for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's all you sort of do as a parent too, is try and help your kids learn to identify what that feels like and then encourage what that feels like. They shouldn't be doing what I tell them to do and what I think would be good for them, because A, they're not going to listen, and B, that's not right. We have to find that ourselves in our lives. So you just want to encourage them to be able to have that knob in them where they can recognize they're fine-tuned. Okay, I'm in sync right now. This is what it feels like. And you identify what it feels like and then search for things that help you get in that sync. And that's only you can discover that, right?
Yeah. And in the book, Sam kind of is very open with you. He's open with you about smoking cigarettes. He's open with you about trying different substances, and you sort of try to lend an ear, give a little bit of input, talk about some of your experiences. What is the thought there? Because
What's the thinking there?
No, I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why. Because you talk about how in your younger years, you self-medicated with drugs and alcohol because you were trying to regulate yourself, right? And I would imagine that being a loner and being very sensitive and creative, you didn't quite know how to like emotionally regulate yourself, right? So now your son is coming to you and he's telling you, I'm trying this, I'm trying that. Like, what's going on in your head?
Well, of course, the first thing you kick to as a parent is fear, because the drugs and alcohol almost destroyed me. So you're, of course, afraid for your children in that moment. But then, drugs and alcohol are a slippery slope that everyone has to navigate and everyone will experiment with and try and navigate. And to pretend that's not going to happen is foolish and sticking your head in the sand. So, I just have been honest with my kids at the beginning. And, I've always said, the only thing that can derail your life, and it derailed mine, is drugs and alcohol. Mm-hmm. And I'm a broken record. And I go, but you're going to do it. And you have it in your family. So just, know that. Information will never keep anybody clean and sober. Right. Information does not stop people from doing drugs and alcohol. And, most people do experiment with drugs and alcohol and go through a phase and come out fine. It's not the end of the world, and it's going to happen. And so you just sort of, I think from someone like me, the most important thing is to kind of not react, because it's like react out of fear. Oh my God, and that's what we do. And because fear is when fear is calling the shots, it's always trouble follows. So, I'm very grateful that he would, share that with me and communicate. And, because all you want to do is, with people you love, is be able to communicate and connect. Because when you can communicate, then you can connect, and then you have intimacy, and then you have a bond. So if that's what's going on and that's what he's thinking about, talk to me about it. Great. Okay. And I'm going to respond because obviously, I've had my history. So I have a fearful reaction when you tell me that, but I hear you. And no, I did have some great fun when I did it. So yes, I did. And to lie and say it was all honest, but nobody can smell truth and lies better than your kids, right? If they say it or not, so it's for them to discover.
See, for me, I did smoke cigarettes in my younger years, but I never liked alcohol, and I was always scared shitless of drugs. So I just never tried them. Like, I don't even like to take an aspirin. So I've always taken the route of telling my son, stay away from it, it's garbage, it's poison, it's this or it's this and it's that. And, that worked for me. Like my father was kind of crazy when he was younger, and he said, stay away from it. It's poison. It's terrible. It sucks. And I just kind of listened. I don't know, but I guess everybody.
You're the rare one.
Huh?
You're the rare one.
I'm the rare one. I don't. But the funny thing is that anytime I've ever been out socially and I say I don't drink, the first thing people say to me is, "Oh, are you in AA?" I'm like, "No, I'm not in AA."
That's because you live in Florida.
It happens in LA.
Well, yeah, of course it happens in LA.
I want to actually talk to you quickly about Orange is the New Black, because I don't think a lot of people know that you were a director on Orange is the New Black, and that show really is what catapulted Netflix, their original content, like into the stratosphere.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience doing that. A friend of mine was one of the producers on it, and they couldn't get any directors on it because it was on this thing called Netflix that no one understood what it was. Like, doesn't Netflix mail you DVDs? How they're doing a show? So what's the show going to be on? Well, they're going to stream it. I'm like, okay, fine, but what channels are going to be on? No one could understand what was going on, and they couldn't get any directors for it because nobody wanted to do who's going to see this thing? So I'm like, I'll do it. And so I did a bunch of them. And then suddenly and I remember the day I was in the office, the producer's office, when they said, they're going to put them all out on the same day. And I remember saying, being the wise one in the room, that's the stupidest idea I ever heard. Right. And so I was wrong again. So then, of course, they come out and Netflix takes over the world. And, House of Cards and Orange is the New Black are the two shows that catapult them to taking over the world. And so it was an exciting moment to be a part of something like that, because it certainly caught me and everyone I know who was involved in it by total surprise that this happened. And those first few years of Orange is the New Black were very exciting. And I think it was a very good show till the end, but after 7 years, it kind of settles into what it is, and it loses that electric spark, but it certainly, for a time, was quite something.
Okay, so you get the opportunity. It's sort of like a what the hell moment. Like, why not? And you have no clue what it's going to do. Nobody knew that Netflix was going to become Netflix. So you directed in, I'm assuming, like the first few seasons?
I not all of them, but I directed on, several episodes a year on all the seasons. Yeah.
Oh, on all the seasons. Okay.
Yeah. Just because, when you find people that you like working with, it's nice to just sort of keep and have a legacy with that. And, you feel part of it. And, I directed, just a few in the last several years of each season, but it's nice to continue to be a part of it and watch the evolution of the actors, for one, and them sort of blossoming out into the world and stuff.
Yes. Amazing to watch their careers just explode. Yeah. So the concept of all episodes being released at once, which I understand what you were thinking, because you're coming from the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, when that is something that's unheard of. So, but what was so interesting about it is it gave people an opportunity to binge watch the show. I mean, that wasn't a thing back then, but to become so engaged in the characters and so engaged in the story, almost like you're watching one long movie.
Well, yeah, what the really interesting thing it did was it changed storytelling, because it changed into one long thing. There were shows before that, like 24 was one season was an arc of one story, and everybody's like, it's just, and a lot of shows had tried it and failed doing that. Doing that over 9 months when you see it once a week was very hard to do. And when the shows that did do it were like, it was a big deal. It was a sort of, freak factor of, it's one story,
Yeah.
But it changed the way we tell stories in television into this long form of one big story. And that's, I think, its biggest effect that it's had.
What was your favorite part of directing that show? I mean, like, what was your biggest takeaway from that experience directing Orange is the New Black?
Well, I think working with the actors in that, because they were all at the beginning, most of them were very raw and very green and very new, and just thrilled to be there and sort of helping to sculpt that, and work with them was fun and exciting, and to see them discover that. There's a moment in acting. I talked about, I think, in the Brat Pack book about, but it's one of the things why I was successful when I was so young, is because there's a moment, particularly when you're young, the moment of discovery and blossom happens in real time in front of your eyes on screen. And It's thrilling to watch. And it's brief moments like the sunrise. It's just a moment of flash. It's like, wow, what a day ahead of us. And it's thrilling. And then the day happens. And watching that kind of blossom happen is very, very attractive. Like, I look back at some of my early movies and I can question some of the acting, but I certainly did have in St. Elmo's Fire, Pretty in Pink, the moment of just sort of blossoming before your eyes. And that's just deeply attractive to people, and people were attracted to that. And I'm not the only ones at it. The ladies in Orange is the New Black had it when we were doing that. And you look back at James Dean and, had it in East of Eden, and Leonardo DiCaprio or whoever in, What's Eating Gilbert Grape. And, you see these, all actors have it. This moment of blossoming is the only word I could think of, where that's just so attractive that it's hard to deny.
You've made a lot of movies throughout that part of your career, the acting part of your career, that have made people really happy, that are a big part of people's coming of age. Some of them have made people laugh. I mean, like my brother, when I was telling him who I was speaking to today, the first thing out of his mouth was,
we get Bernie's. Yeah.
It's like people attach you to certain great memories in their lives. So with that being said, what was your favorite moment on a movie set? Like, just your favorite moment that you just can't forget, that you loved?
Well, you don't always just remember the ones you loved.
We'll talk about the ones you hated, but
well, I have to say I loved doing all of Weekend at Bernie's for some reason. I hadn't gotten an opportunity to do comedy like that, and it was just really fun. And there was so much of that we just kind of made up as we went along. That it was and you could feel the excitement of what we were doing. It just felt like, this is so stupid and so ridiculous, and anything goes, and let's just do it. And and it was fun. The alchemy of the people who'd come together was fun. I enjoyed that very much. I also enjoyed a movie. I loved making St. Elmo's Fire. I thought I was really finally, it's like the third or fourth movie I did. And I felt very finally comfortable and relaxed, and like I was doing what I wanted to be doing, and being able to do what I wanted to do. So I felt like, and it was working, you know, and it was, I look back on that movie and I was having a moment there, and that was nice to feel. The thing, those two movies stand out for me as the pure doing of them was exciting because I felt very present and very alive in the creation of it.
So St. Elmo's Fire was very much an ensemble piece.
Mm.
And in Weekend at Bernie's, it seems like there was a lot of improv in that movie.
Yeah, there was.
Is that true?
There was, it also was a wonderful script by Bob Klein. It was a wonderful thing, so we'd always do the script and then we'd kind of do, okay, do anything you want now, and,
right.
And some of it got in the movie, some of it didn't, but we'd always sort of do the script because the script was really strong. And then it was just like, go crazy.
Right. So I want to talk about your passion for travel because you're also an acclaimed travel writer, and Walking with Sam is kind of a hybrid. It's like a hybrid memoir and travel book. Tell me about your passion for travel and your passion for travel writing.
Well, that all began with the first Camino I walked 25 years ago, or 27 years ago now, because like I was talking earlier, I had this profound experience there. And then so after I walked that first Camino, I kept traveling and alone. I think traveling alone is an important thing. And the farther from home I got, the more at home in myself I felt, and so I kept traveling a lot and I started writing stuff down in little notebooks, and not journaling because I didn't like journaling. I thought it was indulgent, but I would write down stories and stuff of what happened to me. I'm an actor. I've said so much bad dialogue. I know good dialogue when I hear it. So I'd write down things people said to me. And and then I did that for years and years for no intent with it, except just because I enjoyed it. And then one day I did have intent with it. And I met an editor at a magazine and said, you ought to let me write for your magazine. And he said, well, you're an actor, dude. And I said, yeah, but I can tell a story. It's what I do. And I said, if you don't like it, you don't have to pay me. He said, that I can live with. And so I wrote a travel story and it did well. And I wrote another and another. And it just sort of became this sort of accidental career. And I became successful at it for two reasons. One was that, as we were saying, I knew travel was deeply important and a value, not just something you do for Instagram photos, although they didn't exist back then, or for, bragging rights or bucket lists. Or travel is a meaningful thing that can change who we are in the world. And that had been my experience. And so that was sort of the base underneath every article I would write. I'd never write about that, but that sort of was the feeling underneath it. And I knew that to tell a story and not sell a destination. And that's an important thing. So those two things coupled together made me very successful at travel writing. And I loved it. There was no one who loved travel writing more than I did when I was doing it full time for a number of years. And that always shows. If you love what you're doing, it always shows. So, and I felt when I was travel writing the same way that I felt when I was acting when I was young. I just felt a real sense of, oh, there I am. That's me. This is me. Yeah. So I love that. And then I started feeling again when I was directing, when I was directing The Ladies in Orange is the New Black. Again, I sort of thought, this is me. I'm helping these people create this thing. And I felt like me doing that. So they're all kind of the same thing in my mind. And then the books grew out of all that,
Okay. And you said something, I love this quote in Walking with Sam. Towards the end of your journey, you wrote in the book, although the greater world might reasonably argue that this walk has no real purpose, that it achieves no practical goals, and so is of no merit or consequence, there's a growing awareness among us, without being able to quite name it yet, that what we are doing is somehow of importance and meaning. And the reason I love that quote is because in our culture and at least in the Western world, we prize accomplishments that lead to lots of money and lots of recognition, but we don't always value things that make our soul feel alive or help us to grow, help us to grow as human beings, help us to grow and fulfill our soul's purpose in this lifetime. And I think that we do need to put more emphasis on that. It's not always about accolades. It's not always about a paycheck. Sometimes it's about an experience that really enriches who you are as a human being. And so that's why I really relate to that quote. I thought it was really important for people to read.
Keep talking, sister. Yeah, I think that's all true. And there's no better feeling than that. And that it just feels so good when you, like, I'm glad that I'd forgotten about that quote, but I'm glad when you bring that up, because it's like, that feeling that I had when you're about that, going exactly that. I just go, this is a value. What we're doing has, and it's just, there's no better feeling. We want money and things because we feel, give us a high, but there's no better feeling than that deep kind of bellowing resonance of value and satisfaction. Then that money, the feeling of getting money is a high, but that other feeling what you're quoting there is one of deep resonance internally that can't be beat,
Yeah, I think that if we don't have both, I mean, obviously, like on this physical plane of existence, we need money to survive. And, everybody likes to be recognized for things that they do. But if you don't have that inside stuff, it's like you're constantly trying to fill up a bucket that has a hole at the bottom.
Well, that's what it is. You're trying to fill that thing, whereas the other, the quote you're talking about is something that's rising up from within, where the other one is fill it externally. And so, yes, of course, having both would be good. But the problem with it, getting the external things is it becomes, addictive in this way that just wants to be fed. It's like a monster. Fame is a monster that wants to be fed. Money is a monster that wants to be fed. I need more, I need more, I need more. And, that feeling, the internal sort of sense of value is achieved differently. And we become hungry for more of it, but it doesn't necessarily deplete as it's yearning for more. You just sort of, it multiplies as opposed to sort of like a fire burning through things.
Yes, 100%.
It's hard to achieve, of course. It's hard to sort of achieve and whatever. So when it happens, I think at times, certainly. So when it's happening, it's important to be able to recognize it when it's happening, because there's so many times I was happy in hindsight. And I didn't know, it's taken me a long time in life to realize, I'm happy in the moment. And, I will often look back and go, oh God, I'm so happy then. And I didn't feel that way at the time.
Yes.
And, so as I've gotten older, I've kind of gone, no, this right now, this is good, right? This is happening right now. And of course, that's a very precarious feeling and a very vulnerable making feeling. And so then I kind of clamp that down, because you feel very vulnerable and exposed when you're just, this is so nice right now, but that's where it's at, as Sam Cooke would say. But anyhow, yeah, I mean, and on the Camino, one of the beautiful things is so much else is dispensed with and discarded. All you're doing is walking, finding food, and finding shelter, which are easy to find. So it's not like you're scavenging, but that kind of feeling of value and internal kind of thing comes to the surface much more readily and accessibly than it does in daily life when we're constantly being bombarded with things. It's sort of walking the Camino is sort of an inside out job.
I often, sometimes when I'm sitting in traffic, if I'm going to pick up my son from school, or if I'm dropping him off, and I'm sitting in that rush hour traffic in the morning, and I wonder, I don't know, I get this weird vision in my mind of somebody being, let's say, in heaven, or being in like the heavenly or spiritual realm, and then they're dropped down to earth, and all of a sudden they're like this, like, the noise, you know what I mean? Like the horns honking, the music, the screeching of the tires, and it's like, what the fuck, because I don't know. I feel like our world is so freaking noisy that sometimes you don't get a minute to come up for air and actually be in the moment, as much as we all desperately want to be in the moment, because we're bombarded with stimuli all the time.
But I think a lot of the time we don't want to be in the moment. We want to escape. That's why people do drugs and alcohol. That's why people turn the music up. We want to change the way we feel and change. Right. We want to change the moment a lot, Yes. So we're desperately trying to find a thing, we hear bing on our phone. Oh, let's change the way I feel, and so we don't want to be in the moment, and so when it happens that we do, that's a moment to be able to recognize that, I think, super cool. But yes, I agree with you about the sound. And the older I get, I'm such a cliche, that sound and noise offend me and wrap me in a way that they didn't when I was young. Where I fed on that cacophony, whereas now I just sort of crave silence, and I just know that I'm old then now.
The hallmark of old age, yeah. So you've made no secret about the fact that you and your father did not have the best relationship, that you loved your father, but your father you describe him as a very angry man, brooding a lot, mood swings when you were growing up. And you kind of describe a rocky financial relationship and just trouble in general throughout your life. Do you still carry a fear of being a quote unquote bad father or not good enough father with your own kids? Almost like, I want to have a better relationship with my kids than my father had with me. And I want my kids to think more of me than I did of my own dad. And is that like still a thing, or is that dealt with and healed?
Well, you're right in all that. And to go back, my relationship with my dad healed when he was dying, and I went to him when he was dying, and I sat with him for those few weeks, and my wife is the one that said, "You need to go see your dad." I was like, "Really?" It's like, yeah. And I went because I wanted to be a better parent to my kids. That's why I went. I went selfishly. And to sit there with my dad and tell him that I loved him and that I was sorry I wasn't the son he had wanted, and to just be there. And to see in him the fear, that he'd always masked with anger, because anger feels better than fear, right? Anger, you feel in control anyway. And so, but anger is always a mask for fear, always, always, always. And so to see the fear in him, that was so liberating for me, and to hold his hand while he was dying, that was a profound experience for me, and then very liberating. And so, I think I mentioned in the book, we didn't solve our past, we just dropped it. Just discarded it where it belonged, and so that was such a joy. And so now, since he's gone, I'm very free to sort of love him, in a way I wasn't when he was alive, when I was so afraid of him. So that was a big change. And with my own kids, I think the Camino had a lot to do with walking with Sam. Not only the title of the book, but when I was walking, it freed me a lot from that, because I risked in many ways just being who I am, as opposed to being the dad who's got it down and got it sorted. Just risk being not knowing and being a bit of a mess at times, and being reactive and apologizing, and then being vulnerable and being scared, and just sort of being, this is who I am, son, and to let him see me, and I think he appreciated that, and I appreciated him receiving me in that way. So it altered things. So I have less fear or anxiety of it disappearing the way mine did with my father.
Okay.
But that was not the whole intent of the book, really. That was was my intent for that journey. And then consequently the book, that was my intent for that journey. And I've coming to see that in me, it just relaxed me internally in a way that I did know I needed and craved. Has it completed the job? No, but it's begun to do it to a larger degree.
Okay. I know that you were raised a Catholic, right?
I was raised Catholic. Yeah, I am long walked away from religion in my youth. Yeah, I find it shocking that the Catholic Church is still in business after all. No, I do. The appalling things that if any other business had done what the Catholic Church had done, they would be long out of business and in jail. Every one of them.
They have not fallen prey to cancel culture, right?
Bought their way out of that.
Yeah. Well, organized religion aside, in quiet moments, do you pray? And if so, who or what do you do pray? Every day. What do you pray to, or who do you pray to?
In a certain way, it's none of my business. I feel like I think if I could understand it, it wouldn't be the thing I'm praying to. I don't think that matters particularly. I just feel like there's some sort of connection to something, and I know I've known it when I feel it, and I've had moments of it in my life where I have experienced the sensation of grace. When I walked the Camino the first time, and I had that moment in the wheat field when I was sobbing and realized how much fear had ruled my life, it was a moment of grace that I received. There have been other moments in my life when I've had that happen, and that didn't come from me. And that didn't come from, or maybe it came from me. I don't know what the difference is in the certain connection to whatever, So yes, I do. I think I often feel like I'm praying up a chimney when I do, and I don't do it devoutly and in great, I always thought as I got older, I would become more actively, have a more active spiritual practice, which has yet to begin. But it's certainly a question I'm always asking and conscious of. And I understand why religion is valuable to people. It's just not something that particularly I find solace in. And I'm not sure I'm looking necessarily for solace anyway. I'm looking for connection to something.
Right.
Be a part of something, whether, and that has nothing to do with being a loner or not a loner. There's something I often feel, I'm stumbling in the dark with it. And I think that's fine.
Yeah, I think that's fine too. You're connecting to something that you know exists, but you are humble
I don't
enough.
even know that it exists. That's what faith is, right? We don't know that it exists. We don't know what exists. There are certain moments I've had experiences of something that I know, and I've held on to them and dined out on them for a long time.
Okay. If you could travel back in time and alter or change any famous historical event, where would you go to and what would you attempt to change?
Oh my gosh.
Or even just bear witness to in real time?
Well, now that you're talking about religion, I guess the crucifixion would have been interesting. It's one of the things I loved about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the way Quentin Tarantino rewrote that moment in time. I thought that was so fantastic. I'm not a huge fan of his movies, but I thought that was fantastic the way he did that. And just sort of, because that changed our culture in a very big way, that whole Manson stuff. I don't know how to answer that. I don't really think that way. It's like that kind of when we go, what 4 literary figures would you have dinner with? I'm like, dude, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. And what have you mastered so far in this lifetime, and what remains a work in progress for you? What do you think you've mastered, and what are you still kind of struggling with or working on?
Well, this conversation should have told you I was all of it I'm working on and mastered none of it. I don't know that I could say I've mastered anything. Geez, that's kind of sad now that I never thought of it before. Can't think I've mastered anything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. That's a real answer. What do you think you came into this life as Andrew McCarthy to learn? And what do you think you came here to teach?
The answer would be the same for both. And that's that fear is a phantom.
I like that. I like that. I like that answer. Thank you. And no, that's really cool. Thank you for a great interview. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
You can listen to this entire episode and other interviews of mine by going to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and downloading and subscribing to the Allison Interviews Podcast.